welcome to Mark's Woodworking Challenges. I'm Mark, your host, and today we have a hand tool challenge. Today we're going to do part 2 in a series on the AccuBurr scraper burnisher. And as you recall, I said in the last video on the AccuBurr that I was going to test it on curved edges. Haven't got around to that yet. I've been very busy. But today, one of the things I often run into when I'm talking about this with people is, okay, so they say, well, it works well with card scrapers, but what about scraper planes? And I usually say something like, well, it's not really made for scraper planes, because it's just an entirely different geometry on the blade, and we'll look at that in just a minute. But I got to thinking about it a little bit, and so today's video is one where I want to just throw out an idea about using this to turn a burr on a scraper plane blade. So let's get right to it. The equipment for today's video is fairly straightforward. We've got a Stanley number 80 scraper plane with a Hawk iron in it, and we've got the AccuBurr scraper burnisher just as we described in the last video. Now, because the grooves in the AccuBurr burnisher are pretty small, I'm going to use models instead. You guys know I like models. And so here's the AccuBurr burnisher with the sort of V groove in it. And here's a representative card scraper on one side with a perpendicular face here, and on the other side a 45-degree angle such as you would find in a scraper plane. So the beauty of the AccuBurr burnisher is that when you have a symmetrical arrangement like a card scraper, you know, two parallel sides and a perpendicular edge, that's the beauty of the idea behind the AccuBurr burnisher, that you can make this groove and it addresses both corners at the same time and does so very nicely. But you can see that that is just not the case when you do a scraper plane blade instead. There's no way that the scraper plane blade is just not symmetrical, so it's not really suited for the AccuBurr to try to run down here. You know, it'd be like the wrong angle. It just doesn't work as if you try to do it in the same manner as a card scraper. However, what you can do is, if you're coming along like this, if you have the scraper plane blade mounted in this orientation and you have the burnisher perpendicular, if you can arrange to have this side, one side of the V groove, ride on top of the scraper plane blade, you know, say sort of like halfway in between like that, then if you can hold this perpendicular and that, hold it perpendicular to the plane blade, you can basically maintain an angle here that is really not bad for turning the burr on a scraper plane blade. And so that's what I've been trying to illustrate in this video. Okay, let's take a closer look at the procedure for doing that. For this to work, you want the scraper plane blade protruding just a little bit like this, a little bit above the perpendicular edge of the backing board. Because if you didn't have it protrude a little bit, you know, the groove would be above this surface and this would just be on the surface. You know, you could see that it would not be in contact with the edge that you want to turn. So to make that nice and reproducible, we take our favorite shim stock, old business cards, and we just set it down like this. Now we've got a sort of even protrusion above just a little bit, and now we're going to mount it in the vise. Okay, now we've got it mounted in the vise. Here's the backer board and here's the scraper plane blade. And all we're going to do here is, it's very simple. We're going to line up the edge of the blade so that it falls on the right hand side of the groove, in this case in the third most shallow angle groove of the scraper burnisher. Now when I originally did this, I thought, well, I'm going to have a different thickness of backer board for every combination of this groove and that groove and this board and that board, and I quickly realized that that was going to be a pain in the butt, and so I came up with the idea of using washers here instead to adjust, to be able to fine-tune this distance so that you're falling in exactly the right place on the scraper burnisher when you turn the burr. And believe me, it helps to have a magnifying glass when you're doing this, so that you can really make sure that you got the edge positioned in the right place. So, you know, when I did my burnisher, I didn't glue the thing together, so I can just take the handle off, put the washers in, put it back in, and now I'm ready to go. So I'm using this side of the block as a fence for the washers to ride on, and then just running it back and forth like this to turn the burr. Do it a few times. Doesn't have to be real high pressure, and voila, you're done. And that's all there is to it. Now, one thing I want to say before we move on from this point is, you know, the scraper burnisher is, after all, a carbide rod. So you can always, you know, I'm not saying that people shouldn't just use the straight part of the rod to turn a burr like you would with any other sort of garden variety scraper burnisher. I'm just saying that if you want to turn a reproducible burr with the angle at a fixed position, then this idea might yield dividends. So, okay, that's all there is to it. Let's see how it works. Okay, we have just put a fresh burr on our scraper plane blade, and now it's time to test it. So let's see how she does. Aim things down a little bit so that you can see. Here we go. Doing pretty good so far. Now I've got like no tension on the blade right now, so it's just about barely poking through the bottom of the scraper plane, getting some shavings there, and that's basically, so it's set just about dead even with the bottom, and then we put some tension, bow the blade a little bit. Earlier I was getting actually long shavings, Let's see if we can still do that. Okay, let's take a look at that. Holy smokes. That is not bad for a scraper plane. So I'd say that's just about the best burr I've turned on a scraper plane probably ever, certainly in years. Okay, let's try for an up close view. Very nice. Look at that. Look at these very just curly, thin little shavings. Now, I sometimes do my test in slow mode to try to get the best possible shavings. What you normally would do would be, wailing away at it like this. And you can, except for the fact that they fall on the floor, we'll make a nice pile of this would be like more normal operation. Okay. Well, I think you get the picture. And now we're probably going to want to move on to and wrap it up. But there you have it. A nice bunch of shavings from my scraper, Stanley number 80 scraper plane. Okay then, let's wrap it up. So, what have we learned today? I've used the AccuBurr scraper burnisher to turn a burr on a Stanley number 80 scraper plane blade. And frankly, it worked out pretty good, if I do say so myself. Just to reiterate, the idea is, to use my models here, is you can hold the scraper, the burnisher, perfectly flat. You can have the scraper plane blade perfectly upright, and you can adjust the burnisher back and forth so that the sloped groove here catches the edge of the scraper plane blade, and it basically enforces a fixed angle when you're trying to turn the burr. And I mean, I haven't had a lot of experience doing this, but it certainly seemed to work pretty well today. So for you folks out there in the audience, give it a try and see if you have just as good results. And please, leave comments with your results. So, that's all for today. Thank you very much for watching this video. As I said, please leave comments, hit the like button, share the video with other people, and if you aren't already a subscriber, please consider subscribing. And so without further ado, we'll see you next time on Mark's Woodworking Challenges.